Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome a Canadian author of several books, including the recently released With a Good Eye. She's currently based in Israel. She's also a writing coach, editor, and please help me welcome Gila Green. Gila, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me here, Jonathan. It's really nice to be here.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I want to start with you and your background. So you grew up in Canada, just what area around?
My background? I'm originally Canadian. I grew up in Ottawa. I've been in Israel. I'm going to date myself.
Was it a Jewish area where you grew up or no?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Ottawa first of all, Ottawa doesn't have a large Jewish population, so we'll just start with that. The big Jewish population in Canada is obviously in Toronto, which most people would be aware. Ottawa has, I mean, I could stand to be corrected. I haven't lived there for a while, but it has, maybe 20,000 Jews and 10,000 affiliated. So it's a small community, even by Canadian standards. That's a small.
Well, what was your upbringing like? I mean, your family was your family, regard to Judaism, especially like was your background? You're Sephardi also, right? You're all Sephardic.
Well, my father's Taimani. My father's Israeli. He was born in Jerusalem in 1936 under British mandate, British occupation. I don't know if we're allowed to say that anymore. But he was born under British mandate Palestine in 1936. So my mother is from Ottawa. My grandparents are also Canadian on that side. They're Ashkenazi. Their parents, came from Russia. That's already, in the 1880s. They came to Canada. So they've been in Canada for a long time on my mother's side. My father obviously is an immigrant to Canada. So we grew up speaking Hebrew in the home.
Oh, you did? Okay.
We always spoke Hebrew. I mean, English is already his third language, but he spoke Hebrew and then Arabic and then English. So maybe even a little bit Farsi and then English. So we spoke Hebrew in the home. I went to an Orthodox Jewish day school.
So you were observant. You were pretty observant then growing up.
I mean, we were, and by Israeli standards, you would call us traditional, right? I thought we were observant until I came to Israel. And then I realized, oh no, that's all the parameters have changed here. So I guess by Israeli standards, we were very traditional. And by Canadian standards, maybe a little more so. I can't speak to the standards today, but we all went to Orthodox, day school, etc., and kept the holidays, etc.
So growing up, I mean, you said that you did not have, there were not a lot of Jews where you lived, right there. So how was it in the neighborhoods and everything? Did you experience anti-Semitism, or is everyone just basically okay then?
Well, first of all, we're going to be talking about then, right? Because the demographic is completely different today.
Let's talk about then.
Unrecognizable city. So we're just going to be clear. Also, With a Good Eye, my new novel takes place in.
We're going to talk about your book for sure. Yes.
Yeah, but I'm saying it takes place in Ottawa in 1980. So we're going back so that people don't think that that's how it is today. In those days, yes, it was what we used to use the term WASP. I don't know if you're even allowed to say that anymore. I don't know all the rules, but it was a very waspy town. It's a government town, right? Maybe parallel. Maybe if you think of Washington, because Ottawa is the capital, and so I don't know, something like 60% of the population would be civil servants, and then you also have, so that's federal government, and then you have the regional government, and then you have the municipal government. So in those days it was a really government town, a very what would have been called a waspy town in those days. So I definitely stood out. I did not blend in. My name didn't help because Gila doesn't mean anything to people. Very difficult to pronounce. It was a real struggle for people. Still is. By the way, I was there in 2020. I was doing a book tour, and I still had to spend the whole time saying Gila rhymes with Sheila every time I was introduced to somebody. But in those days, most people just thought I was Italian or Greek. Today, they would think I was Lebanese or Iranian, but in those days, it was constantly, oh, you must be Italian, you must be Greek. There really no really almost zero Sephardi Jews, definitely, or Taimani Jews, forget about that. So I definitely stood out, and yeah, for sure, there was anti-Semitism, not again, not how people are seeing it today,
Right, right.
not this overt, but definitely I remember going to day school, and there would be certain kids who walked there, and they would have bars of soap thrown at them on the way to
Oh,
school. You have to remember it borders Quebec, so that's French Catholic.
yeah.
It's very, very close to Quebec. You could probably hear more French in Ottawa than like in downtown Montreal. So in those days, definitely there were times we went to class and like Juif was written on the boards, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But nothing like, it still wasn't acceptable to be publicly
Right.
anti-Semitic like it is today. But there definitely was that sentiment. Yeah.
Well, so you growing up, when did you first start showing an interest in writing? How did you start realizing that you had a talent for it, basically?
Well, I always loved reading. I was a stereotypical bookworm. You go to a restaurant, you have a book under the table. Everywhere you go, you have a book under the table.
I'm
Like one of those kind of kids, really nerdy
familiar with that.
kid.
Yes.
I still remember the librarian in my day school telling me that I've read all the books. So either I can start rereading or I'm going to have to wait till they get a bigger budget. But I was a big reader. And so I think that writing just felt like an extension. Probably in high school, I started writing obviously essays in high school. And once you're getting,
That was really the
what,
first time that you started taking to it in high school?
yeah, once teachers are telling you that was a great essay, that was really well done, once you start getting encouragement in
Sure.
something, you
Yeah.
start doing it more. I don't know, you start writing poetry and stuff like that. And I think that maybe that was more common in those days without all the internet today. Um, so yeah, and then I mean, I was already registered at university at 17. My first degree was in journalism, so that's all
That's it.
writing,
Who
all
you,
writing.
you said you read a lot as a kid. Who were some of your favorites?
Well, again, in Canada, we read a lot of Canadian literature, right? We would
Mhm.
have read a lot of Alice Munro and Margaret Atwood and Timothy Finley
As a kid, you were reading that?
like a young teen,
Sure.
yeah, because
Okay.
I was just reading everything.
Mhm.
As a kid, the really young kid, like primary school, I remember all the Little House on the Prairie
Mhm.
books, and all the Judy Blume books, all the like stereotypical stuff. Obviously, I gravitated to a lot of Jewish writers as well, Mordechai Richler, and those kind of classic Jewish writers. I really read everything. Really, I was kind of person I'd like read the phone book if there was like nothing to read. I was reading the phone book the other day.
We had similar backgrounds in childhood, I think. Like I said, I did Canadian authors. I was reading that you did a lot of flash fiction. So what kind of flash fiction were you doing, and what age was this around?
Oh, flash fiction. I probably didn't even hear of flash fiction until, probably the early 2000s. I think once I went back to Bar Ilan University 19 years ago now
Well, for
to
those
do
who
the
don't know,
math.
could you just explain what flash fiction is?
Oh, sure. Well, flash fiction, sometimes people call it microfiction. It has a lot of synonyms, but it's typically acceptable to call something flash fiction if it's a fiction piece under 1,000 words. That's like the acceptable kind of definition. If it's under 1,000 words, it's flash fiction, but it'll have the same principles as short story writing as opposed to poetry, say, which doesn't operate on the same principles as short story writing at all. So you still are supposed to have, some kind of plot, some kind of character, some kind of conflict, some kind of location, the same main 5 or 6 elements that you would have in a short story, you would have in a flash, but it would just be even more condensed or intense.
So, and that's when you started taking to it, around in the like 2000s, you said?
Yeah, I think especially at that time, I had like 5 kids under the age of 9 and not a lot of help around here. So
Wow.
that was kind of just the idea of even writing a novel, like the idea of having that kind of time or attention span for that kind of a canvas wasn't really. So I was
Well,
playing
five
more
kids. I'm
with
surprised you even able to get up to 1,000 words.
yeah, you'd be surprised. Sometimes I feel like I had more time then than I have now, just because you're really on a schedule usually when you have young kids.
That's
So at
true.
least you know, like they're sleeping at this time, they're napping at this time, they go to school at this time. Sometimes you actually get more done when your life is more scheduled.
Regimented. So how did flash fiction lead to you getting publication? How did that lead to, what's that path like? That going from flash fiction to eventually writing books and getting published?
So again, that was really encouragement. When I always thought that I would probably have to wait till my kids got old enough for me to go overseas, and I would do a master's in creative writing somewhere, because I couldn't imagine there would be an English, a creative writing master's program in English in Israel. I just couldn't imagine that that would happen. And then one day I saw, an advertisement in the Jerusalem Post that they were opening up a creative writing program in English in Israel at Bar Ilan University. And I thought, wow, no, even I was expecting my fourth at the time, but I thought, wow. But my husband was like, no, you've been waiting for this. You do this. You're going to work it out. You're going to go and we're just going to work it out. He's always been really supportive. So I went, and in those days, this was 19 years ago, they didn't have, a budget. They didn't have permanent staff. They were bringing American professors in on, I think they're called Fulbright scholarships, that Americans would come in. So I was in their second year of the program. They had Mark Mirsky and Steve Stern, who came in from New York. Mark Mirsky taught at City College, and Steve Stern was from I think, and he's at Skidmore. So we suddenly had these professors, and they were just super encouraging. They were like, "No, you should be sending this out. You should be publishing this stuff." So I started really that kind of, in those days we're talking printing it out, stamps, envelopes,
Yeah, exactly.
stamps for them to write back to you. You had to try to find American stamps if you wanted a response. It was a whole mission.
People who don't realize, I mean, you wait long enough now in the electronic age to hear back from people. Then it was just like forever. Yeah.
Yeah, it was months. It was months and months. So it was a totally different world. Basically, encouragement. If people encourage you, you'll start sending out. And then once you get published once or twice.
So did you get an agent to this? I mean, how did that work? Did you get an agent, or you went straight to an editor?
No, short stories, you don't need an agent. An agent's not going to make any money. I mean, agents work on commission. So there's no money for them to be made off working in short stories. Even if
that was your first thing, getting published as short stories.
Yeah. You just send straight to literary magazines. You go, you look for their submissions, their guidelines. I mean, in those days, you would print it out. Today, you would obviously send it by email or through their whatever their application is, submittable, or whatever their online application is. Yeah, because there's no money to be made in.
Well, so how did you come to your first book?
Well, eventually I had published probably 20 or 30 short stories, some of them a couple of times. And then people just started telling me, if you really want to do this as a career, nobody wants to read short stories. No one wants to read. You have to write a novel. Like, you're never really, like, how far are you going to go? Like, who, it's kind of like in a lot of people's minds, it's a whole bunch of people publishing in literary magazines for themselves. You know what I mean? It's like this group publishing for themselves, because who's going out and buying, university literary magazines, etc. Very small people. So eventually, that was the kind of advice I was getting, that's really nice. You have all this kind of publication record, but like, who's read you? Like, no one. In those days, it was completely different from today. You didn't want to be published on the internet. If you were published online, that was like considered second rate. You wanted to get in there print. It was all different. We're talking like 2005. It's all different now. Now you want to be online, so you can send people links and people can find you. It's all different. It's all different. So I thought, okay, I'll have to try to turn one of these short stories into a novel. So that's what I started doing.
So when I've spoken often about where Jews stand in publishing, which, if you haven't been paying attention, isn't good. But I've had other authors on as well, and we've echoed that sentiment. So when you and I first chatted, about you coming on, you had mentioned about your experiences in publishing when it comes to Judaism. And so from what you told me, you had an offer on the table from one of the big five, but they wanted you to change your character's Jewish identity. So can you tell me about that?
Right. Yes. So that was my book, Passport Control, which this cover here. I have my covers up. for inspiration when I feel like this is pointless, so I can look up and remind myself that something can get completed. You can't get to the finish line. It's important to have something like that up, I think, for everybody, whatever they're doing, whatever their career is. Um, I wrote this novel, Passport Control. Passport Control takes place in 1992 in Haifa, and it was based on my. Obviously, I've changed a lot of it. Thank God there was no real actual murder in my real life. I obviously really dramatized this situation, but I took it on the premise that I had in real life, which was in 1992. My journalism program was 3 years. I took a year off. I went to Haifa University. And I think it was because of my name, because my father's Israeli. My last name was very Israeli, because I was not put with any of usually the overseas students are put together, which anyway at Haifa University is small. It's like 60 students. I was not put with the overseas, even though I was only the only Canadian still. All the other English-speaking overseas program people were together, but not me. I think there was one other person not. I was put in a room with in real life, I was put in a room with two Moroccan roommates, a Palestinian, like an Israeli Arab, but she identified as a Palestinian. She called herself a Palestinian, even though she was from Nazareth and grew up here, but that was how she identified. A Palestinian master's student, a Druze student, and me and an Ashkenazi student. And I'm really sorry I'm using these terms. I actually don't believe in them at all. People ask me what I am. I say I'm Jewish. That's it. But for the sake of expressing myself, I'm using these terms, but I really don't see people in these terms at all. I don't like.
I'm the same. Yes. Okay.
I don't like slotting and categorizing people, but that's including Jews. But that's what we have. We have language. So what can I do? And I just went in. I thought I was quite sophisticated, right? I was fluent in Hebrew. I completed 3 years of a journalism degree. I didn't think I was such a. But meanwhile, I could not understand the dynamics. I could not understand the tensions. I could not understand what was flying in this room. And I had to live with these people, right, for a whole year, 24 hours a day. And I just could not, I didn't know the tension between Ashkenazi and Moroccan, the Druze and Palestinian. I didn't understand that Druze girl in real life. Her father was a professional army officer. So he used to come in full army uniform. And I could not understand. Then the door would close, and she was 18. The other one was doing master's already. She was 26. Would be telling her off, she's a boged, she's a traitor to her people. So, and I could not understand what was going on. So the premise of Passport Control, which I obviously reduced characters and massively dramatized, was this situation and how naive sort of we are in the West. It was really about the naivety and gullibility that we come over here and we think we know what's going on. Even someone like me who'd always followed the news, spoken the language, but I had not lived here. I'd come as a tourist, go to the Dead Sea, go to Masada, go home. That's not living here. And that's what it was about. And eventually it got accepted by a subsidiary of Simon & Schuster. And my editor was Jackie Mitchard. I don't know if you know who Jackie Mitchard is. Do you know who Jackie Mitchard is?
No.
So she was back in the 90s. She was like Oprah Winfrey's first pick. Remember Oprah Winfrey used to have this club?
Yes, the book.
So she was like her first pick, and she picked her book. I think it was called Under the Sea or something. And that got made into a film with Michelle Pfeiffer and someone else. So that just made her super famous, right? Like in those days, you got picked by Oprah.
Right.
You were
on your way. Yes, right.
She's probably published at least 30 books since then or something. So I was very flattered that like this housewife with no connections, I didn't go to Harvard, I didn't go to Columbia, I didn't go to any of these places, was accepted. And then we did a cover, we did everything, we did the editing, added chapters, deleted everything. Everything's changed her age, everything. We were really happy with it. It was about 3 months away from publication. And then boom, I got a letter in one email that said that they were cutting costs. And so they had axed her, right? They had fired her. They were cutting that subsidiary. Wow. And I was being moved up to this really prestigious, I was happy where I was, but I was going to be moved up. It doesn't exist anymore. It was called Simon Pulse at the time. This very prestigious YA, Simon & Schuster, imprint, etc.
Once someone else takes over your book before it's completed, it's never.
Yeah. Exactly. So suddenly I was, tearfully saying goodbye to Jackie, which I really didn't want to do because we just really clicked and everything. And we'd worked a lot on the book. And suddenly I had this new editor. Um, and suddenly everything in the book was offensive, like everything. Suddenly this was in like 2017 approximately. I needed to have a Jewish sensitivity reader, an American sensitivity reader, a Palestinian sensitivity reader, an Israeli sensitivity, and everything was coming back circled in red. Nothing was good. And they kept saying to me, like, they were like, I wrote a blog post about it at the time. Like, what are you trying to say? She kept saying to me, what's the message of your book? Isn't the message of your book that deep down we're all the same? And I was like, have you ever gone out your front door? Like, no. Deep down, people are not the same. That's what growth is about. If everyone were the same, what are we doing on this planet? I mean, the whole point is to grow and look at things from different points of view.
Perspectives, right?
We're not all the same. Absolutely not. So you can tell that wasn't going to work. They kept trying to make it much more. It was a novel. It wasn't propaganda. I don't write PR. It was a novel with all different points of view. And it still is. Anyway, to make it short, eventually they were schlepping it out, pushing the publication date forward. I could tell that I was just being dragged around. And all of a sudden I got this email, it would be so much more original if your heroine was Syrian Christian.
Of course.
There's so many Jewish heroines. Think of how many Jewish heroines there are. That's boring. It's been done. But can you think of a Syrian Christian heroine? No, you can't. Like, let's be original. And I was like, hey, first of all, what happened to cultural appropriation? I thought, like, I can't even have someone in a sombrero because that's cultural appropriation. Obviously, that wasn't going to work.
If this had been anything other than Jewish, you would never have been asked to change it, by the way.
For sure. No, it was so obvious by all these different readings I was having. So obviously, I wasn't going to make my heroine Syrian Christian. I couldn't, even if I wanted to, I couldn't. I'm not going to do that. It's not going to happen. So it was, now I'm fairly blasé about it. At the time, it was actually quite a painful experience. So you feel like you've gotten somewhere in your career. And then I was told, I had an agent at the time in Toronto, and he kept saying, you don't want to be, and he was Jewish. And he was telling me, you don't want to be difficult. You don't want to ruin your reputation. You want to be flexible. And it was like, okay, come on. I'm not erasing myself. So that obviously didn't go. And I ended up putting it back together. And ironically, sending it out to a very small press in Virginia, which she's retired now. She doesn't exist anymore. And this very nice lady she was an American married to a Palestinian. She'd lived for 11 years in some Palestinian settlement in Yehuda v'Shomron. I can't remember now which one. This was years ago. She was a Palestinian activist all the way. She had Palestinian flags on she had a series of 3. But she said she's looking for international fiction. So I sent it to her. After that experience, I was willing to send it to anybody. And she said, you know what? I don't agree with everything you've written in this book, but this is a really good story. And I think it'll generate curiosity among my readers. And let's do it. And she published it.
Amazing. Yeah. You mentioned that your Jewish agent was trying to talk you out of it too. I find that that's a lot of times the case, and it's upsetting. I had a story that was based in Jewish lore, and I had an agent tell me try to make it less Jewish also. The same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good for you.
I mean, a very Jewish person, not like an unaffiliated. He was not an unaffiliated Jewish person. He was very strongly Jewish, but it was like, it's not good for your career. It's not good for your career. And I was like, well, for what career? My career, selling myself out, apologizing for who I am. Which career?
No, good for you. Definitely. No, absolutely. So you also mentioned about what you felt was the lack of representation of Sephardi or Yemenite Jews. and which I think you probably extend to other Jewish identities as well, because I've heard from others stating that there, lack of Orthodox representation or observant Jews, in fiction also, that they don't get stories either. So what do you feel about that then?
100%. I was very frustrated as in primary school and high school. It didn't matter. Every new Jewish authors, I would devour them.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course I could relate. I had a Babi and a Zaidi. We had chopped liver, we had gefilte fish and harine, but I had this whole other side.
Sure.
That was never represented. Different levels of observance weren't represented. I have tried in one of my novels is South Africa based. It's my currently, except for my new one and that one, not an Israel based novel. Also, even Israelis, the effects of combat, war, none of that was there. And I've really tried to have a range of Jews in passport control, the
You
two
can't even mention Israel in fiction now, especially if you're going for young adult to middle grade. They just don't even look at it for the most part.
Right. Well, so yeah, I mean, well, my book is actually coming out Sunday officially on Amazon. It's also my birthday, and it has,
Happy birthday.
the Hamsa on the cover with the Star of David, and it's a small publisher in Montreal, but I saw them yesterday put my cover and me saying where I'm based on their Instagram. They're small, but they haven't said a word, and I have another book coming out with them in 2025.
Oh, we're going to talk about both of those. Yes.
They've been promoting it the same. They haven't said anything to me about anything.
Have you,
sometimes small is better. I don't know. Maybe I don't know.
Sometimes, yeah, there are pros and cons on each one. I'm going to get to your books. So, have you written stories about? Do you have stories about these communities? Ones you mentioned?
Which communities?
Like Sephardi, Yemenite. Did you have stories about?
Well, my short story collection, White Zion, which also came out in 2018. That came out in outside of Boston with Servina and Barva Press. White Zion spans. It's a short story collection, but they're linked short stories. So it doesn't talk about the community so much as following one family, and they go from Yemen to the Ottoman Empire. I would call that almost sort of a little bit auto-fiction-y, because most of that history there is my own, okay, because my own great-grandparents, left Yemen, arrived in Israel in the Yeshuva Rishon in the first, what's called the first settlement in the 1881, 82.
Wow.
That they settled under the Ottoman Empire in Jerusalem and also in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, like both sides, two sets of grandparents. So I have, it's not sort of about that community, but it does follow this family from Yemen, from Sana'a, through Egypt. Then they came to Ottoman Empire through British Mandate, and then modern Israel and some modern Canada. So I do have stories that span. Also in passport control, I have used that history, the biographical history of my father, like referring to British Mandate, etc. So I do have that in my writing. Yes, definitely.
That's good. Well, speaking of things, we're talking about all this stuff that publishers won't touch. So you live in Israel now. We've established that. So when did you move there, and what made you decide to move there?
Well, I moved as in finally settled here, like I said, rather than the go back and forth as so many English speakers spend like a good 2, 3, 4 years just going back and forth. I think I moved here finally in the early 90s. It's hard for me to remember exactly, 91 maybe, 92, something like that. The early 90s.
Oh. You've been there a while, yeah.
Because I was going back and forth quite a bit. I spent that year in Haifa, and then I went back, and then I came back, and I went back. You know how, like, I think a lot of people can relate to that. We're listening to this because it's a big decision, and it's there's a lot to take into consideration. What made me? Well, I actually met my husband here, and at that time, he's South African. So at that time in the early 90s, I don't know if you've ever traveled with a South African in the early 90s, but it's really, really, really difficult and time consuming in those days because it was the end of apartheid. Sure. A lot of South Africans were trying to get out or etc. And so you were just, the Canadian, you just like walk right through, and then he was stuck for 40 minutes of questioning, etc. It didn't matter where we were flying. So ultimately what happened was, to try to make this story short, I was not, I had in my passport, I went to live in South Africa for a while. This was the last year of apartheid, like de Klerk, because this is last year of de Klerk.
Right.
As soon as I told them I had a journalism degree, that was not a smart thing to say. Being like an honest Canadian. So they put this huge stamp in my passport that I am not allowed to work, not even to freelance. It says explicitly, no work, no freelance. So obviously, could not stay in a country for very long that I could not work in. And then when he came to Canada the second time, they rejected his visa as well. They were like, well, you're going back twice? Like, don't think so. So he was in Johannesburg and I was in Ottawa, and he was like, okay, we have no country. Like, you cannot work here legally, so that's not going to work. And Canada is not letting me in. So what are we going to do? Like, in those days, just calling was a big deal. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Calling was a very expensive. My mother at that time was like, if you don't marry this guy, I don't know, I've spent on long distance calls. So in the end, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to meet you in Israel, because we don't have even a continent at this point that we can both work and be on. So to tell you the truth, that was I might have moved to Israel anyway. That definitely was in the cards. I was going back and forth. But what happened in actual fact is we had no country that would accept us both. So we came to this, even though, that was a big deal. He didn't speak any Hebrew. He didn't know anybody here. He was like, what? South Africans, even especially in those days, were very attached to South Africa. They were not imagining leaving it. And there was no other choice. So we just came here with nothing and winged it. That's what we did.
You're doing well. You mentioned about when I was living there was like a decade before you moved there. So I was living there as like a young teen, I guess, kid to young teen, and we lived in my family lived in Mercaz Klita, an absorption center, and there were no phones in each of all the things. So if you wanted to call back to the States, we had to go to the office to have someone call into that central office. We were sitting in the office talking to like my grandmother or my uncle back then. So yeah.
And you had like a scratchy connection, right?
Right,
It wasn't
of course.
even like a good connection. It was like,
Of course, but it wasn't. We didn't have a phone in our regular apartment even. So it was like it was really like old days back then, like in that time. So
yeah.
you've been in Israel all these years. So well, let me ask you now about when October 7th hit. I know how I felt here for me and many other Jews. I mean, I've written about this. I've spoken about it. It just hit so hard. It was like visceral. I just would never be the same after that. So what was it like over there, when that hit?
On the actual day of October 7th?
Yeah.
Well, on October 7th, I was probably like most of the country, I was asleep when all this was going on. It was like 6 in the morning or something, 6 or 7 in the morning on Simchat Torah. So I was asleep, and the siren went off. And I actually at that time thought it was part of my dream, because we weren't, there were always, I hate to say it, it was a terrible expression, but these tiftufim, these little like, sprays of, deadly rockets, but they try to use this pretty word like tiftufim. Right. It's just like raining a little bit. Meanwhile,
it's deadly rockets, sure, of course.
Like that would happen every once in a while. So when I heard it in my sleep, I thought, oh, okay, they're doing that again, because it was something they've been sporadically doing really since like 2005.
Yeah,
like
it's nonstop. It's like
So that's what I thought. But then it was going again, and I realized, wow, this is actually a tzeva adom, like a red alert. So my daughter was sleeping over, my daughter-in-law, my other daughter, and she was sleeping. This is my bomb shelter here, because it's also my office, and it's also the couple's room for when they sleep over is a pull-out couch here. It's like a triple purpose room, like a lot of rooms in Israel. And, the door was locked. I mean, she was asleep. We were banging on the door and she woke up and we didn't understand what was going on. The men, the ones on my road, my husband, they didn't come back from synagogue. So we didn't know what was going on. And we basically thought that this was this typical tiftifim. But then we had quite a few sirens, which you don't get a lot in Beit Shemesh. So it was really just a lot of speculation, like, wow, what's going on? We don't live in an area of country that usually gets 3, 4 sirens. I can't remember exactly how many there were that day. And we started hearing trickles of news. There's always Hatsala people and all those kind of people in shul with walkie-talkies. You always have medical staff and ambulance staff who get, but we didn't believe what we were hearing. My reaction was, this is not possible. Like, there's no way that what we're hearing is accurate. And even after, when the kids turned on their phones, my first reaction was, this has to be fake news. I remember my daughter telling me, no, they've taken over a police station in Sderot, and me saying, like, that, it literally impossible. Like, I don't even know now if I've really internalized that that's possible. I did not believe that it was possible. And I don't think I'm like a naive, like pied-eyed person. I know my father fought in 2 wars. My brother was in the Lebanon War, but the first Lebanon War, not the second one. I didn't think it was possible. I kept saying, this is fake news. Get off TikTok. Get a real news station on your phone. There's no way whatever's on TikTok is real. I thought it was propaganda, psychological propaganda. I didn't believe it.
Well, and afterwards in the community, it just
I just think people were, well, first of all, people obviously weren't, and people just started to move. Like, a certain age group of men or older teen boys, they just disappeared. Like, they just disappeared. There was a certain period of time in the beginning where there were just no men between the age of like 18 and 30, or I can't give you exact. They're just gone. Everyone just went to whatever their unit was, or their volunteer unit, or everyone was just gone. So it was really, it was very, very dramatic. It was scary. It was shocking because don't forget, it took, I don't know exactly, but something like 48 hours just to tell us that they cleared that area in the south. So for a couple of days, we just didn't know if they'd made it, from the south up through Ashdod, Ashkelon. Were they hiding, in the bushes? Like, we just didn't know where they were till the army could say, okay, it could even have been 72 hours for them to say, okay, at least this first group, whoever came in on October 7th, there's no more of them, right? So for 3 days, it was
terrifying.
It was terrifying. I mean, it's still, again, I think that whatever we're saying now, we'll say differently, in a few years' time, because I still think we're in it. I think it's October 7th still in a lot of ways. So we're not really seeing, almost maybe, I don't know if it's exactly a parallel, but maybe now if you look back and you think about Corona, and you try to think like what was happening. We were wearing masks and whatever. I don't know exactly what was going on in Florida, but it would be different if I asked you then than if I asked you now. Right?
Well, let's switch to other things, better things. Let's talk about your book. Okay, so it's recently out, and it's called With a Good Eye. So tell me about the book.
Right. So I don't know if the book is switching that much, just because I still have an Israeli character in there who suffers from PTSD from combat, but we'll switch. Anyway, we'll switch to fiction as opposed to, unfortunately, the non-fiction we have right now. Obviously, we have to put a word in that we're all just really hoping to hear good news, any good news about our hostages. So With a Good Eye is a book I tried to write for a number of years. It was one of those books, I'm sure if you're also a writer, everyone's kind of got this manuscript that they like try to write. It's not working, put it away, go back, not working, put it away. It was one of those manuscripts that I just wasn't cracking it. I wanted to write a book where I portrayed parents with mental illness, but in a very real way. I didn't want some sort of Hollywood stereotypical PTSD. I wanted really a three-dimensional person. In other words, the person has something, not the something is the person, right? Like you, sort of that thing, like you have diabetes, you aren't diabetes. You have, they're always telling you ADD is something you have. It's not what you are. Now that's hard to put on a page, right? Because that aspect is overwhelming. So that took me maybe a few years, maybe it was talent, maybe it was perseverance, I don't know. But every time I tried to do it wasn't working. And then finally sometimes there's just too many cast members. You have to like narrow down your cast. So it's a story about told from the point of view of my heroine, Luna Levy. And Luna Levy is a 19-year-old. She turns 20 in the book. She's living in Ottawa of 1980. Ottawa is also a character in the book. I've already had, feedback, and not even necessarily from Jewish people at all, that they really like the portrayal of that kind of small town mentality, what goes on in a small town, how it's portrayed, because you don't see that as much in novels. I'm talking about different Jewish characters in all novels. Also, a lot of times novels have, very wealthy people or very good looking people and big glamorous cities. There seems there's an overabundance of that also in a lot of literature. And like a lot of people don't come from glamorous, exciting places. And there's a lot of character to be brought out there as a writer. That sometimes gets glossed over because, agents and publishers are always telling you they want familiarity. They want New York, they want LA, they want I remember when White Zion once got to a random house in the UK, they said, this is great and we'll take it if you could make it all London. And I'm like, but I can't. It's Canada. I can't make Canada London. They're like, oh, but our readers would relate so much better to London. I'm like, well, I guess you need an author who grew up in London. Like, I can't help you there because
I've heard that so often. We love this, but change it.
yeah, exactly. We love it, but change it. And always going for what everyone is always familiar with, sort of, I would say safe. Like it's safe to locate in a big city because they already know that works. So let's just go on safe. Anyway, so Luna Levy has to deal with these two parents. I wanted to tell a story. We hear a lot about parents dealing with children who have issues, whether it's addiction or whatever difficulty they have, mental illness, depression, addiction. But I don't feel there's as much about what about kids? What about kids who have to grow up and try to function with parents who are not so functional? I think even today there's still a lot of shame around that. There's still a lot of humiliation and embarrassment around that. And I really wanted that book to be out there for those people, for those readers. And we didn't all grow up also in the Jewish community with high functioning parents. And it's true, there is a lot of second generation Holocaust that's definitely out there. But that's one genre, and there are other things. We didn't all grow up with or second generation Holocaust or very high functioning parents. There's like a whole other basket of things, but I certainly couldn't find it out there. And I wanted to write about it and maybe try in my own teeny tiny little way to break that stigma. So the father has PTSD from Israeli combat, which at the time I thought was going to be more minor. Now, of course, it's more on topic and topical. And the mother suffers from narcissistic personality disorder, which at that time when I was writing it and publishing it, I thought that was going to be more on topic because the word narcissist was like literally everywhere. Like someone looks in the mirror, you call them a narcissist. Like it was being watered down to just be a bit vain or narcissistic personality disorder is not being a little bit vain. It's not being a little bit self-absorbed. That's not what it is. It's actually an extremely damaging, to say the least, condition to have if you are raising children. It's not about, being a little preoccupied with your looks or something like that. That's not what it is. So I wanted to write about what it was like for her. So Luna has her dad is basically MIA most of the time. He kind of pops in and out. The war memories of his that are in there are real memories that I used from my own father Blian Hari is 88, but when I interviewed him when he was 70, now he doesn't even remember, or he's blocked it out, I think, what he's told me. But that I interviewed him extensively at one point. I made him write in Hebrew, and then I translated it myself. So those are real. And so the mother has to sort of deal with Luna. She has an older brother, Ronen, who's kind of her foil. She's got like the Sephardi looks. He's got like the blonde, blue-eyed looks. And the family lurches from just wacky, crazy, not going to work business to wacky, crazy, not going to work business until finally the mother really brings in a partner he's the villain. I love writing villains. Villains are fun. That's another skill. You got to work on villains without turning them into cartoons, right? They have to be villainous, but not Gargamel, right? So that takes a while to figure that out. She finally one day just brings home a partner that's just like over the top, that just Luna is just, and that's it. So the book is about how she deals with this mother who's completely, she's a stage actress. She's always off in a play, partnering with people who are, criminals, low lives, not people you want around your daughter. And she needs to deal with that, overcome that. Had to put in a bit of fun, obviously. She gets a boyfriend. There's a little tiny bit of romance there, so it's not totally, kosher romance, but romance. So it's not completely negative. She's got a fun best friend. It's balanced out, but it's basically trying to get the reader to see what it's like from her point of view, coping with these two parents who you cannot speak to or change. And I asked the question at the end, do any of us ever really leave home? Like, do we ever really leave that first family, that nuclear family, or can we escape it, or are we kind of always inhabiting?
Yes, no, right, yeah.
That question. So far, I've had great feedback on it, and I hope it does reach those people, and reach everybody, particularly that segment of people who still feel a lot of shame around growing up in that kind of a situation.
And your book, The Inheritance, is due out next year?
The Inheritance is due out in 2025. It will probably be available for pre-order, directly from the publisher in the next couple of months. But Amazon is like super strict. Like Amazon, they give you a date. That's the date. People have already been ordering With a Good Eye from the publisher. I don't know. Americans just have a lot more, I guess, what's the word? Competition, because they'll say, oh, but I found it on Target, or I found it on Barnes and Noble. So I guess those places are less strict. Amazon was like,
it must be
August and not before, but I guess because people are reviewing it and or emailing me about it, so I guess they're getting it. It's also my first audiobook, and I'm hoping my audiobook will be out next week. Was finally, I wanted for years to get into audiobooks. As you know, they're quite expensive, but so I finally found a way to do it. Hopefully you'll tell me, well, maybe how it turned out, like less expensively. I recorded it myself, which I know a lot of people are against, and they only want professional actors, but that was beyond me. So I actually did it myself here. You do get good acoustics if you have your own bomb shelter. Someone said you sit in a closet, and I'm like, no, I'm in Israel. I don't have to sit in a closet with a flashlight. I sit in here with air conditioning and all my stuff and my coffee. In Israel, you get your own bomb shelter. Someone interviewed me the other day, a podcaster. She wanted to be in my house, and she was like, wow, you have great acoustics here. I'm always in my cupboard. I'm like, oh, no, that's because you live in an old building. Just borrow someone's bomb shelter. You'll be a lot more comfortable. So there's a plus. There's a plus for
I was going through your website, and so you also offer, writing classes. Can you tell people if they want to take writing classes with you, what's offered?
Right. So I offer different levels of book editing, developmental editing. I used to teach a lot of classes. I used to, from 2009 to 2019, really year round, I offered creative writing classes on the Wow Women on Writing site. But I felt after a decade, I was getting a little burnt out of groups and just not offering the high value anymore. So I switched more to one-on-one coaching. So I meet with writers on Zoom. We do one-on-one coaching, different levels of editing. And that's all on my site at Gila Green Writes.
Well, your site has a lot of cool stuff on it. I mean, all your blog posts that I saw, and there was one that was pushing about, Jewish. I saw Jewish Book Carnival, so I got all excited thinking that there was going to be this big Jewish book festival.
That's monthly, right?
Yes, I saw that.
Someone hosted, a different blogger hosted every month, and August was my month.
No, it's right? You have a lot of cool things on your site. So I see a lot of good, interesting blog posts. So what are you working on next?
Right. So, I obviously have been trying to work on some of the promotion for With a Good Eye and The Inheritance. I'll be honest, since October 7th, really couldn't write. Obviously I could work on other people's work. Like I could write professionally. But besides, maybe like I posted an essay in Distinctions, a couple little places, I found it very difficult to just say anything. The tone, the pitch here is so dramatic that to try to just very, very recently, I would like to put out I don't think I could tackle another novel right now. I've done 6. I would like to start a new short story collection. Just recently, I wrote my first post October 7th short story. I'd like to start a new collection, and if I do write a book length canvas, I think I would like to expand to nonfiction, and just to do something different, to just expand and try something different and do something in this area. I took a course since October 7th. I really wanted to do something different, just to like get out of, I don't know, get my head in to help like other people and not
Right.
myself. I was looking around for what could I do. People were picking fruit and making sandwiches and just doing unbelievable things, and babysitting for wives whose husbands were in reserve, everything. And I was looking for something, and I ended up seeing an advertisement and signing up to take this course to work on a hotline for sexual assault victims.
Mhm.
And so I've just finished that and started it. And I want to maybe maybe I'll try to do something nonfiction in that direction.
Well, yeah.
I think a lot based on just I don't even have words for how the world sort of didn't seem to accept what happened on the 7th in terms of the
It's
sexual
incredible.
assault, to put it lightly. So I think maybe that's motivated me to want to write something, but write something sort of educated about it, not just kind of from a distance, but sort of maybe close up about it, because I can't even express the shock at denying.
Well, it's shock, it's rage, but it's nothing surprising, unfortunately. When it comes to Jews, it's like, it's expected that that's the reaction. But it's just like a lack of caring.
But even that, like, did you not, it didn't surprise you post the Me Too and all the Me Too stuff, and
Not when,
suddenly
no, it didn't surprise me. Not when it comes to Jews. No, it didn't surprise me. There are two different standards always.
right. So I agree with you on that, but with the barbaric rape level, that did surprise me, given that they filmed it themselves. So the
I
fact
get
that you
it.
could
Yeah,
even you're waving like the world's largest flag, like a flag the size of the moon,
right.
and saying, I did this, live streaming, and still it gets denied. That's, you know what I mean? It's
Going back,
literally,
if there are two sets, if it had been any other group, it wouldn't be this. That's it. Yeah, there are two different tiers for this. Well, going into that type of thing, so what advice, you just mentioned it yourself, what you're doing. So would you have any advice? You have a lot of things on your website, including advice. What advice would you give to writers out there, particularly Jewish ones who are struggling right now?
well, first of all, I would say don't pressure yourself. I mean, people have to go at their own pace. But if you can write, I would say to any Jewish writer of any, there's so many different types of writers out there, right? Writers mean so many things, that it is so important that we do record this time, and that we don't just, let it go by. Because already, right? Think about already now. And I'm not saying Corona is the same thing, but it's just similar in terms of the shock and change of life, and how life won't be the same after Corona. If even now it starts to get fuzzy, hazy, what happened
Yeah,
there? Don't let that happen. It could be poetry, it could be songs, it could be a play, it could be a novel, it could be anything, it could be nonfiction, but to not put down anything, it could be just diary entry, anything. You don't want to be in a situation where 2, 3, 4 years from now you don't remember exactly, like you're saying, the feeling of betrayal. Get it down somewhere, even if you don't show it to anybody right now.
yeah,
Doesn't matter, first draft, scribbles, but we need to have this down. We need to have it down with the depth of the feeling we have now. I promise you, I know from interviewing my own father, that if I wouldn't have gotten it down then, I wouldn't have this now. That you've got to get it down. You have to witness. You have to witness, even if it's just for yourself. You never know. In 5 years, you might be able to,
mhm,
use it in a more public forum, a website, something, an anthology, compilation. But I would really encourage people, obviously, if you can't, if it's, impossible, but try to get, even if honestly, take 50 magazines and, cut out photos about how you feel and make a collage, something that you remember, because just psychologically, we do tend, it's like people say, you purposely don't remember the pain of childbirth, so you'll have more kids, right? We do tend to automatically soften things in retrospect. And that can't happen here.
I agree with you. I agree. I think that's great advice. So you mentioned your website. Let's mention it again, as well as your other social media handles. How can people follow you on social media?
So the best way to follow me is to sign up to my website at gilagreenwrites.com. I am on Instagram. I'm trying to go back to Instagram. I'm trying the time. I don't know the time at Gila Green Fiction. I am on Facebook at Gila Green. On LinkedIn. I have a teeny weeny presence on Twitter or X. I just couldn't. I don't know. I couldn't get into it. The characters. It was too much. I think it missed me. But like, if you look for me, you'll at least see me and then be able to find my site. So like, I have a presence in these places just so people who are looking for me can find me. But the best place is my website, Facebook. Write to me through my site. There's a contact page. Love to hear from you. Put a review on Goodreads, Amazon. Jewish writers are being really just erased from space. So it's really important, more than ever, to mention Jewish writers, request Jewish writers at bookstores, libraries, book clubs. It's really important. Maybe more so the ones living in Israel. I don't know, but I just know
I think it's everywhere. It's universal.
We're just being cut out, everywhere.
Well, Gil, I want to thank you again for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I had a lot of fun talking. And
thank you so much. We should have better times, be able to talk about better things next time, fun things, hopefully good things.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you. Well, once again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. Again, a very special thanks to Gila Green. And again, please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.